The morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, and I stretched out, ready for nothing but a quiet weekend by the lake. This was supposed to be my time to recharge, away from the noise, away from the stress, just me and the sound of water hitting the shoreline. But the peace didn't last. I opened the door to grab my coffee off the porch railing, and there she was, Karen, the HOA president, standing like she owned the place. Arms crossed, chin lifted high, tapping her foot against the wooden steps as if she had been waiting for me to come out so she could pounce. Without so much as a greeting, she snapped, "Pack your stuff. My guests will be arriving in an hour, and they'll be staying in this cabin." I thought I must have misheard. I laughed at first, because who in their right mind would stand on someone else's porch and demand they move out of their own property so strangers could take over? But when I looked at her face, I realized she wasn't joking. She was dead serious. She stared at me like I was an intruder on her land. I set my coffee down slowly and asked her, "Excuse me, what did you just say?" She jabbed her finger toward me and raised her voice. "You heard me. This cabin is going to be used by my out-of-town guests. They're very important people, and I promised them a place by the lake. It's time for you to be cooperative. As HOA president, I have the right to allocate property use when needed." I blinked at her in disbelief. Allocate property use? This wasn't a park bench or a clubhouse, this was my legally owned cabin. I had worked for years, saved up, and finally bought this slice of peace away from the city. And now this woman thought she could just demand I hand it over like she was assigning a parking space? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Karen, this cabin is mine. I bought it. I pay the taxes. I maintain it. You don't have any authority here." The words seemed to hit her like gasoline on fire. Her face flushed red, her eyes widened, and her lips tightened until they almost disappeared. She stepped closer and hissed, "Don't test me. I'm the president of this HOA. When I say something, it's final. You will pack your bags and clear out before my guests arrive." For a second, I thought maybe I was in some bizarre dream, because this level of entitlement didn't feel real. But the anger in her eyes told me this was no dream. She truly believed she had the power to throw me out of my own home. I stood my ground. "You don't own this cabin, Karen. You don't control this property. I'm not going anywhere." That was the moment her composure cracked. She threw her arms into the air and let out a frustrated yell that startled a couple of birds from the nearby trees. She spun on her heel and muttered to herself before whirling back around to face me. "Fine," she said sharply. "If you want to play this game, I'll have you removed. I'll call the police right now and tell them you're trespassing." My jaw almost dropped. She was really going to call the cops on me for living in my own cabin. The sheer audacity of it all made my head spin. "You're going to call the police and tell them I'm trespassing on my own property?" I asked, trying not to laugh at how insane this had become. She smirked, pulled out her phone, and started dialing. "Watch me," she said. "We'll see how fast they drag you out once they know the HOA president is making the complaint." At that moment, the peaceful lake retreat I had envisioned for the weekend felt like it had been hijacked. This wasn't going to be a calm getaway. This was about to turn into a showdown, and I knew it was only the beginning. The birds had gone silent, the water seemed to ripple harder against the dock, and Karen, standing on my porch with her phone pressed to her ear, looked like a storm that had just arrived to wreck everything in its path. Karen wasn't bluffing. She had the phone pressed to her ear, pacing up and down my porch like she was the sheriff of the entire county. Her voice was sharp and commanding as she barked into the phone, "Yes, officer, we have a trespasser here at the lake cabins. He refuses to leave. He's occupying property that isn't his and causing a disturbance." My stomach twisted with disbelief. I had never met anyone so bold, so entitled, and so determined to twist reality to suit their own power trip. But this wasn't just about her lying to the police, this was about her trying to strip me of something I had poured my heart and money into. I wasn't going to let that happen. As she hung up the call, she smirked at me like she had already won the battle. "They're on their way," she said, her arms crossing again. "You might as well start packing, because when the cops arrive, it'll be easier for you if you're ready to leave." I stared at her, then calmly walked back inside and returned with a folder. Inside were my deed, tax records, and ID, every document proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that this cabin was legally mine. I set the folder on the porch railing and said, "If you want to play this game, I'll be ready. You might fool your HOA board with your power trips, but you're not going to fool law enforcement." That wiped the smirk off her face for half a second, but she quickly replaced it with a sneer. "You think that piece of paper means anything? I'm the HOA president. My authority outweighs whatever you think you own." She had no idea how ridiculous she sounded, and it was almost painful to watch. But I kept my cool. Losing my temper would only give her more ammunition. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car rolled up the gravel road leading to my cabin. The sight of those flashing lights made Karen puff up with pride, like her cavalry had arrived. She waved at the officer dramatically, calling out, "Over here. Over here. That's him. That's the trespasser." The officer stepped out, a tall man with a calm presence, clearly already tired of the theatrics he was walking into. Karen rushed to him before he even closed his door, pointing furiously in my direction. "He doesn't belong here. He's squatting in community property. I need him removed immediately before my guests arrive." The officer raised his hand to slow her down and then turned to me. "Sir, can I see some identification, please?" Without hesitation, I handed over my ID, deed, and tax paperwork. "Officer, this is my cabin. I own it outright. She doesn't have any authority here. She's trying to throw me out so she can use my property for her own guests." The officer flipped through the documents carefully, his brow furrowing as he read. Then he looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, according to this paperwork, he's the rightful owner. He's not trespassing. He has every legal right to be here." Karen's face turned crimson. "No, no, no. Those papers are fake. He forged them. This cabin has always been part of the community. I'm the president, and I said he can't be here. You work for me, officer, so do your job." The officer's expression darkened. He clearly wasn't impressed with her theatrics. "Ma'am, I don't work for you. I work for the law. And the law says this property belongs to him." Her voice rose to a shriek. "You don't understand. My guests are arriving, and I promised them this cabin. I don't care what that paper says, he doesn't get to stay here." By now, neighbors had started to notice the commotion. A few peeked out from their porches. Some walked closer, whispering to one another. They all knew Karen's reputation. She was infamous for writing people up for leaving their trash cans out too long, for fining families because their children rode bikes on the wrong path, for sending threatening letters over lawn decorations. But this, trying to take someone's home, was a new level even for her. The officer raised his voice to cut through her ranting. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Right now, you're bordering on filing a false report, which is a serious offense. If you keep this up, there will be consequences." Karen's eyes widened like she couldn't believe someone had dared to challenge her authority. She stepped closer to the officer and jabbed a finger at his chest. "Don't you threaten me. I'll have your badge for this. You can't talk to the HOA president this way." I could see the patience draining from the officer's face. He glanced back at me, shaking his head slightly, as if to say he dealt with people like this more often than he'd like. Then he looked back at her. "Ma'am, last warning. If you don't calm down and step off this property, I'll have no choice but to take you in for disorderly conduct." Instead of backing down, she doubled down. She stomped onto my porch like she owned it, gripping the railing tightly as she shouted, "This cabin is not his. It's mine to assign. My word is final, and you can't stop me." The officer took a step forward, his hand moving to his cuffs. The crowd of neighbors, now larger, started pulling out their phones, recording the whole scene. Karen didn't notice, too caught up in her own performance. She continued to shout, insisting I was a criminal, that the documents were fake, that the cabin was community property. But every word out of her mouth was digging her hole deeper. The officer finally said, "That's it. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and filing a false report." He reached for her wrist, and when she yanked away, he simply spun her around and clicked the cuffs on her wrists with practiced ease. The collective gasp from the neighbors was followed by murmurs, some shocked, others satisfied. Karen, the queen of fines and threats, the woman who had bullied the neighborhood for years, was now in handcuffs on my porch. She kicked and screamed, accusing me of ruining her reputation, promising she'd have her lawyers come after me, shouting at the officer that he'd regret this. But no one was listening anymore. The neighbors kept filming. The officer guided her toward the squad car, ignoring her wild claims. And me? I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching justice play out right in front of me. I couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. For once, her bullying had backfired spectacularly. She had crossed the line, and this time, there was no escape. The sound of Karen's shouting carried down the street even as the officer led her toward the patrol car. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding in HOA meetings, now cracked with desperation and rage. Neighbors had fully gathered by this point, forming a small crowd on the edge of my property. Phones were out, cameras recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some looked shocked, but a surprising number looked entertained, like they were finally watching the villain in a long-running drama meet her downfall. One neighbor, an older man named George, leaned over to another and muttered loudly enough for me to hear, "She's finally getting what she deserves." His wife chuckled softly and added, "About time someone stood up to her nonsense." Karen, handcuffed and red-faced, whipped her head around at the crowd, snarling, "Stop recording me. This is harassment. I am your president, and you'll all regret this." But the cameras didn't stop. If anything, more phones went up, catching every ounce of her humiliation. The officer tried to guide her into the back seat of the patrol car, but she refused to sit, planting her feet stubbornly on the ground like a child throwing a tantrum. "You can't do this. I'm in charge here," she screamed. "This entire community answers to me. You're all going to be fined. You'll lose your homes. I'll make sure of it." Her words didn't scare anyone. Instead, people laughed, some shaking their heads in disbelief. For years, Karen had been a nightmare for this neighborhood. People told stories about her sending violation notices because a garden hose was left uncoiled, because kids chalked drawings on the sidewalk, even because someone painted their shutters a shade darker than the approved color. She thrived on intimidation, but seeing her in handcuffs stripped that power away instantly. The officer had clearly had enough of her nonsense. With a firm push, he guided her into the back seat of the car despite her kicking and yelling. She slammed her shoulder against the seat, screaming, "You'll regret this. I'll have every single one of you arrested. I am the HOA president." The door shut, muffling her screams, but not silencing them completely. Inside the car, she banged on the window with her cuffed hands, glaring at everyone outside like she could burn holes through us with her rage. The officer turned to me, handing back my paperwork. "Sir, thank you for your patience. It's clear you're the owner here, and she had no right to make those claims. We'll be transporting her for disorderly conduct and filing a false report. I suggest you hold on to these documents tightly in case her legal team tries anything further, but from what I can see, you're in the clear." I nodded, grateful that he had handled the situation so professionally. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate it." He gave me a tired smile, the kind a man gives after dealing with one too many Karens in his career, and then walked back to his car. But before he left, he turned to the crowd and said, "Folks, this isn't a show. Please head back to your homes." Of course, no one moved. They wanted to soak in every second. The moment the officer drove off with Karen still screaming in the back seat, the crowd erupted with chatter. Some laughed, some clapped, others exchanged stories of their own encounters with Karen. One neighbor, a young mom named Rachel, came up to me with relief in her eyes. "You don't know how many of us have been waiting for this. She fined me 3 times last summer because my kids left their bikes on the sidewalk for 5 minutes. 5 minutes. She threatened to take us to court if it happened again. You don't know how good it feels to see her finally get taken down." Another man, Tom, shook my hand firmly. "She's been nothing but a tyrant. She once tried to tell me I couldn't have a barbecue grill on my deck, even though there's no rule against it. She invents rules as she goes along, just to keep control. What you did today, standing your ground, it's a big deal for all of us." Their words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on defending myself and my property that I hadn't realized how many people were quietly suffering under her reign of terror. They weren't just amused by her downfall, they felt vindicated. For them, this wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. As the neighbors continued to talk, someone mentioned the HOA board would probably hold an emergency meeting soon. After all, their president had just been arrested in front of half the neighborhood. Another whispered that this might finally be the chance to remove her for good, something people had wanted for years but had been too afraid to attempt. While the conversations swirled around me, I stepped back onto my porch, finally able to breathe. The chaos had drained me, but the view of the lake brought a strange calm back to me. The water shimmered in the afternoon sun, as if nothing had happened, but I knew this day had changed everything. Inside, my phone buzzed non-stop. Friends in the neighborhood were sending me links, apparently videos of Karen's arrest were already circulating in group chats. By the next morning, I knew it would probably hit social media. Karen had always wanted attention, but not like this. She wanted to be seen as powerful, unstoppable, the ruler of the HOA. Now she was going viral as the unhinged president who got arrested for trying to steal a neighbor's cabin. I couldn't help but imagine her sitting in a holding cell, still shouting about her authority, still insisting she was right, still believing she could control everything. But this time, the world was watching, and no one was buying her lies. The lake was calm again that evening, but the energy in the neighborhood buzzed like electricity. Word of what had happened spread faster than wildfire, and by nightfall nearly everyone within a mile radius knew the story. The almighty HOA president, Karen, had been cuffed and carted off right from my porch after demanding my cabin for her imaginary, important guests. I sat out on my deck with a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the orange glow of the sunset reflecting on the water, but I could still hear the murmurs from neighbors gathered in small groups down the road. They were reliving the drama like it had been the grand finale of a long, painful series they had been forced to watch for years. And in many ways, it was. For the first time since I moved into that cabin, I didn't feel like the new outsider being targeted. I felt like I was part of the community, because we had all witnessed the same downfall of someone who had held everyone in fear. The next morning, things got even wilder. My phone lit up with messages and notifications. One of the videos from yesterday had made its way onto a local Facebook group, and within hours it had over 1,000 views. People from outside our little lake neighborhood were commenting, laughing, calling her the HOA dictator and Lake Karen. Someone even clipped the part where she screamed, "You all work for me," and turned it into a meme. I shouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did, but after everything she put people through, it felt like justice had finally caught up with her. Later that day, I walked into town to pick up some supplies, and even the clerk at the hardware store gave me a knowing grin. "You're the guy with the cabin, right?" The one Karen tried to take over? Man, that's all anyone's talking about. Guess she finally pushed too far. I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, she definitely did. By the time I returned, a group of neighbors had gathered near my driveway. They waved me over, eager to talk. Rachel, the young mom from the day before, spoke first. We heard the HOA board is calling an emergency meeting tonight. They can't keep her as president after this. Too many people saw what happened, and the police report is out there. She's done. Tom, the man who had shaken my hand earlier, added, this is bigger than just removing her. People are fed up with the entire board. They've been letting her run the show for too long. We're organizing a vote to replace half of them. I could hardly believe how quickly the tide was turning. It was like one act of resistance had snapped the spell she had over the community. For years, people had felt trapped under her thumb, afraid to challenge her because of the fines, the threats, the constant surveillance. But seeing her dragged away in handcuffs flipped a switch. They realized she wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was just a bully who finally got caught. That night, the emergency meeting took place at the community clubhouse. I decided to attend, mostly out of curiosity. The room was packed wall to wall, with neighbors who had never bothered to show up before now filling every chair. The board members looked uncomfortable, sitting at their long table without their leader. One of them, a nervous-looking man in glasses, cleared his throat and said, as you all know, President Karen was arrested yesterday during an unfortunate incident. The board is reviewing the situation. Immediately, voices rose from the crowd. Unfortunate? She tried to steal his cabin. She lied to the police. She's been harassing us for years, and you all let her. The board tried to calm everyone down, but the people weren't having it. For the first time, they weren't afraid to speak out. They listed grievances, one after another, each story more ridiculous than the last: fines for flower beds, warnings for wind chimes, even threats over the color of a doghouse. And now, with her power stripped away, it all poured out like a dam had broken. Finally, the board had no choice. They announced that Karen had been suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of her charges, and that a vote for new leadership would be held in the coming weeks. The room erupted with applause. Walking back to my cabin afterward, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief not just for myself, but for everyone who lived here. It wasn't just about me keeping my cabin anymore, it was about the community finally being free of the fear she had ruled with. Days turned into weeks, and sure enough, Karen's reign crumbled completely. She was convicted of filing a false police report and disorderly conduct. She avoided jail time, but the fines were hefty, and her reputation was beyond repair. She was forced to resign as president, and eventually, she even sold her house and moved away, too embarrassed to face the neighbors she had tormented for so long. The new HOA board was nothing like the old one. They promised transparency, fairness, and a return to common sense. People started decorating their yards without fear, kids played freely without parents worrying about complaints, and the entire neighborhood felt lighter, freer. And me? I kept enjoying my lake cabin, finally able to sit on my porch without worrying that someone would come storming up the steps with a list of demands. The water sparkled, the air smelled clean, and the quiet peace I had been searching for when I bought the cabin was finally real. Sometimes, when I sat out there with my morning coffee, I thought about Karen. I pictured her face turning red as the handcuffs clicked, the look of disbelief in her eyes as her power slipped away. I remembered her words, "You'll regret this," and couldn't help but smile. Because the truth was, I didn't regret a thing. Standing up to her wasn't just about me. It was about sending a message. No matter how loud or powerful someone pretends to be, they can't take away what you've worked hard for. And in the end, the community didn't regret it either. They were finally free, and all it took was one showdown on my porch to make it happen.